Hello everyone, my name is Ryan and welcome to yet another episode of Sailing Viridian. So in one of my previous episodes, what I did was troubleshoot and upgrade the AC electrical system on my boat. So that involved going around and determining what the root cause of the issue was. In my case, it turned out to be the 3 AC outlets throughout the boat. The slip power hookup and the distribution panel, in my case, which was just 2 20-amp breakers, all of that functioned perfectly. All I had to do was go ahead and replace the AC outlets. Today, what I've decided to start to do is to troubleshoot and fix the 12-volt system, 12-volt DC system in this boat. So I have a feeling, after looking at the back of the DC distribution panel, that this is going to be quite a bit of extra time compared to the AC system. I believe I showed in one of my previous videos the back of the panel, which is down here. And the back of the panel, half of the wires are ripped out, some of the fuses are missing. Who even knows if these switches are still functional? So this is definitely going to take a lot more time to troubleshoot, as well as all of the lights. I mean, I can wire them up and test them, but if the lights, for instance, let's say the anchor light doesn't work, I mean, that could be something wrong with the wiring going up the mast, something wrong with the panel. It could be the actual bulb itself, since I know a lot of these bulbs are incandescents, and incandescents don't last nearly as long as LEDs. So overall, I definitely have a feeling that this is going to be a multi-weekend long project, especially because I plan to actually fully replace that DC distribution panel down there. So that's going to involve rewiring from scratch an entire panel. But I guess with all of that being said, let me go ahead, turn the camera around and show you some of the things that I've purchased in order to start actually troubleshooting this and fixing it up and making it functional. Now, believe it or not, there's actually some wind out on the lake today. Contrary to popular belief, Lake Lanier actually does get wind. So I apologize if there's any wind noise coming through the microphone. But the source of all power in a sailboat 12-volt DC system is the battery. So in my previous video, I showed you all how I purchased a battery enclosure to keep any sort of water or dirt off the battery. But you look inside, there is no battery. I just have some wiring, which I end up not needing for the AC system. This is single phase 3-wire cable. Some other cabling, some terminal mounts, and all that for the battery. But today, I do have a battery, which is up here in this box, because it's 57 pounds, and I don't feel like lifting it all the way down there right now. Still in the box, fresh from Amazon. It is a 12-volt, 100-amp sealed lead-acid battery. So eventually, probably once I have some help, since I mentioned how I have back problems, I don't really want to try getting 60 pounds worth of lead-acid battery down in this little crevice. If it has handles, maybe, but if it doesn't have handles, I'm going to wait for a friend to come help me so I don't hurt my back, since I'm not supposed to lift that much weight. But the end game goal is to get that 60-pound battery down into this plastic enclosure and then wire it up. So to wire it up, I have some battery terminal connectors. These are actually from a company that makes them for car audio. So you can see the little circle piece there grips around the terminal on the battery, and then you have a couple of different options when it comes to cabling that comes out. I think it goes all the way down to 4 gauge, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, 4, 8, and 10 gauge. I have a 10 gauge, just red and black wire here. This is 10 feet long, so this should be long enough to get from the battery all the way into where the distribution panel will be eventually. I do recommend if you're going to be installing a system from scratch, definitely make sure that you have the correct size gauge wire based off of the amperage that you'll be running through it. I can post a really useful interactive, or it's actually not really interactive, but chart that shows which gauge wire to use based off of the distance the power has to travel, as well as the amperage or current that you'll be passing through it, along with the voltage drop. So if it's a non-critical application, generally 10% voltage drop isn't that big of a deal. But if it's a very critical application that absolutely needs 12 volts, you usually don't want it to have any voltage sag greater than a couple percent usually. What else do I have in here? I have just a little voltmeter, so I'll probably install this. I got it on eBay for a couple bucks, but it shows you the voltage of the battery, and also has a little gauge that lights up around the corner. It probably has some pre-programmed voltage levels that represent the different percentage points around here, which is kind of cool. We'll see if it's accurate though. It's only a couple dollars. So I got quite a few goodies here, courtesy of Amazon. Let me go ahead and, I guess, you know what, I'll start over here on the left. So starting off, I purchased a spool of 12 gauge 100 feet wire. This I'll use kind of just throughout the general installation. 12 gauge should be enough for every application that I have when it comes to a current, distance, and voltage sag equation. The most, I guess the highest current item being my 12 volt cooler over here, which pulls about 50 watts. That will hopefully be the most, unless for whatever reason the incandescent bulbs on this boat decide to pull more, which they very well might. I'll most likely be replacing all of those with LEDs though in the future. We also have here a 12 circuit blade fuse block. So I'm going to go ahead and open this up, explain how this works. So this gives you an extra level of protection and safety when it comes to short circuits. So what you do is you hook up your positive from the battery down here at this terminal, and you hook up the negative up here at this terminal. All of these 12 screws here, one will run to each of the negative portions of whatever your load is, whether that's a light, a stereo system, or for instance my fridge. Those just run straight to it. Now what you have here, this is a 15 amp fuse. So what this is designed to do is provide you with an added layer of protection when you're running the current through to whatever you're powering. So let's say, for instance, I want to power 4 lights individually, my fridge and a stereo. So I would go one light here, one light here, one light here, one light here, my fridge and my stereo. And you can select different fuses, which brings me to another item I purchased, which is a little fuse kit. So in here there's a, looks like there's 10 of each, ranging from, let's see if I can get it to focus here, ranging from 2 amps all the way up to 35 amps. So it really allows you to have a decent amount of customization. For instance, if you know a light, is only going to pull 5 or 10 watts or so, at 12 volts, that's easily below 2 amps. So you can have a 2 amp fuse for kind of that added layer of protection. But for instance, with my fridge, which pulls around 50 watts or so, you're looking, when you're talking about 12 volts, I'd probably want to go with a 5 or a 7.5 amp breaker, depending on if it has any additional startup current when you first boot it up. Now additionally, for an extra layer of security, you can purchase 12 volt circuit breakers. They're very similar to the AC ones that I showed in one of my previous videos. Basically the way they work is when they sense a certain amount of current passing through them, they'll switch off. And you can easily switch it back on. It isn't like a fuse where it actually breaks the circuit physically. All it does is it switches off. So I do have one of those purchased. It's not yet here currently, but I do recommend one if you want kind of that extra level of added security. So in this system, the way it's going to work is the power is going to come from the battery, pass through that breaker that I mentioned, pass through this distribution fuse block, which will have different fuses for each individual item that I want to power, as I mentioned, based off of the current that they pull. And then from there, so everything's not, powered up all the time, it's going to run through this rocker panel breaker here. So these are just some rocker switches, total of 6, and all they do is flip on and off. So this will allow me to control the power running to everything so that it's not just running 24/7, of course. The neat thing is that this panel did come with some additional stickers, so I can customize the look, if I can get it open, there we go, of the switches. So quite a few options. You have some printed ones up here in the top with some weird font, in my opinion. I don't know why they use that font. And then you have some more imagery styled ones down here. Definitely some pretty strange ones on there. There's a Sasquatch, beer, rabbit, some middle fingers. Yeah, they got a nice VHF sticker there. Alien. Pretty much everything you need. And there's also actually another sheet of stickers in there as well with some additional ones. But this will allow me to control where the power is going to in terms of being able to switch it off and on. So for instance, if I wanted one anchor light, one running light, and then let's say I wanted no cabin lights on, but I wanted my fridge on, I could do something like that. So this will be installed down here. Sorry for all the noise, it's actually raining right now. Quick little downpour. But this will be installed down here, kind of in replacement of the old switch panel down there. Well, I had to shut the hatch because it started absolutely downpouring. But getting back to what I was talking about with the rocker panel here, I'm still not too sure how these are wired. My theory is that you hook up the 12 volts to these two leads here, and all of the switches go live, essentially. And you flip them, and then, for instance, this little prong here would give 12 volts if you turn it on. It's not the way that I really want this to work, because as I mentioned, I want to be able to control the fuses for each individual item that's being powered. So I think what I'm going to have to do is actually go in and remove all of these positive terminal connections here and rewire the way I want it. So that's going to be a fun ordeal, which is another reason why I think this is definitely going to take a lot longer than the AC upgrade. And that brings us here to my terminal assortment kit. So quite a few different terminals here, all the way from 26 to 16 gauge is red, 16 to 14 gauge, and then 10 to 12 gauge up here is yellow. So most likely I'll be using these yellow connections here, since the wire that I'm using is 12 gauge. But if for whatever reason I do need to use smaller gauge wire for lower powered items, it comes with quite a few here as well, which is nice. So definitely nice kit, and I'm sure I will get my use out of it. Moving on here, one of my goals is to eventually get a nice stereo system installed on the boat as well. So I purchased some Kicker outdoor marine speakers, so you can kind of see from that angle, you can see the woofer inside and the tweeter. I believe it is it's either 5 3/4 inch woofer or 6.5 inch woofer. I can't remember off the top of my head. It's got a little tweeter here. I hooked them up to one of my stereos back at home. Sounded pretty good. They were only about $100 or so. And my plan is to mount them on the railings on the stern of the boat with one of these guys here, which is a tube mounting kit. So for instance, this would grip, these are rubber here in the middle. These would grip onto those railings that are back on the stern of the boat, and then it provides me with a mounting hole there that I can then use on the speaker to mount it. So only bought one set of these. I have the speakers outside in the rain actually, but that's okay because they're marine. And then I bought one kit of these just to make sure that they work. Only about $10 or so. So it comes with two. I think they're actually for installing LED light systems on like off-road vehicles. So this would grab onto like the roll cage, and then you would use the hole there to mount on the LED system. But that'll be a fun project. Definitely looking forward to getting some nice tunes going on the outside of the boat. And then finally here, I have some replacement interior lights. So I got these on Amazon as well. It was actually kind of hard to find ones that were warm white. Pretty much everything that I saw online was kind of that like hybrid warm and cool light based off of the kelvins, the temperature of the light coming out. Mostly everything I saw online was around the 4,000 Kelvin range, which is a little too cool in my opinion. Especially on a boat, you don't want to feel like you're in like a doctor's office. So these ones are actually like 3,500 Kelvin, I believe, which is pretty warm. Let's see if it's listed on here. Nope, it just says warm white. It doesn't have the actual temperature of the lights, but I'll put a link in the description to these two. So I just bought one just to see how it mounts and make sure that I can properly mount it and see what it looks like before I actually go ahead and buy the whole set. So you can see the light up here. This is the old original Catalina light. It's got one of these. I honestly I don't even know if I want to take it out. It's all corroded and stuff start falling everywhere. One of the original incandescent bulbs. But you can see the size difference here. The light's pretty hefty compared to the old one, but it should provide a lot more light. And the nice thing is it has two switches. One is for turning on just one singular section, and then two is to turn on both. It would be nice if one was more of a dim function and it would turn on both but at a lower brightness, but I mean that's probably a lot more complicated than just cutting the power to one versus two. So it'll be nice to definitely get some real lights installed compared to my trusty little lamp I have over here in the corner that's just hooked up to the AC system back there. So that'll definitely be good to get some lights. So now you'll have a good feel for what some of the actual items and products are that I'm going to be installing when it comes to actual tools. So of course you're going to need wire strippers. You're most likely going to need a voltmeter to test if wires are live. As well, probably most likely a screwdriver. I also brought my AC powered drill, since I'll most likely have to either punch through the storage compartment where the battery is stored into down here where the switch panel is, or potentially I might have to put some more holes in other places depending on where I want to run wires. But apart from that, I know I had that real big safety moment with the 120 volt AC system. Luckily, since this is 12 volts, it's not as dangerous, not nearly as dangerous as 120 volt. The most important thing in this case is to just make sure that your hands are dry. But still, even with that being said, 12 volts isn't as dangerous, but it still can be dangerous. So just make sure that the wires you're working with are not live, which is why I recommend also bringing a voltmeter as well. All right, I am not going to lie. We are into day number 2 of the DC install. And the only thing I've gotten to so far is bringing the battery down into the battery enclosure. The main reason I didn't get a whole lot done so far is because yesterday it started raining, as I'm sure you heard in the video, and then I guess I forgot that the sun is starting to set earlier and earlier, so by the time I was kind of done filming, it was already starting to get dark. So, on to the next day, and I'll most likely be taking the boat out today, so I'm not going to get a whole lot more progress done. But I got the battery down in there. I also got on the battery terminal mounts for the wiring. I still need to tighten them up. I need to go out and buy a socket wrench set. Surprisingly, I actually don't have one. I need it for a couple other projects as well. But they're at least on there. Not super snug, like I mentioned. Reorganize this area a little bit, and then I also have the speakers down there right now for storage. I also did mount the speaker mounts here, so you can see I never spaced out correctly. One for one speaker, and then I'm going to get 2 more mounts over there. Hopefully they don't impede the ability to go down and mess with the motor too much. I don't really think they will. Might get in the way a little bit climbing in and out of the boat, so we'll see what happens with that. But I can always put the ladder over kind of on this side. I originally wanted to mount the speakers, one of the mounts here and here, but the curved portion just threw off the measurements way too much. So we're gonna have to go with the straighter beam right there, which should be fine. And these just need to be tightened up a little bit once I get the actual speaker on. When it comes to mounting the fuse block, I have a couple of ideas. One of the ideas is to mount it in here so that all of the electrical system is kind of in one area, since I also have the AC breakers in there. So that is possible. The only downfall of that, or the negative, would be that I would have to run quite a bit of cable, you know, one coming from each of those fuses, there's 12 total, into the rocker switch panel in the interior of the boat. So it would be a lot of cable all coming from one place. It would make more sense from a cabling perspective to install the fuse block closer to the rocker panel, but I'm still kind of up in the air because it would be nice to have everything kind of in one place. The other place I'm thinking of potentially installing it is, if I come down in the boat, there's no way I'm going to install it back underneath there. The only other decent place that I've thought of is actually behind this wooden panel here. So there is some space. If I remove some of the stuff I have back there, I could potentially mount it on this piece of wood in here, so I can still easily access it and wire it, because, you know, I can take this cushion out and get in there and move everything else, and be a lot easier to work in there. So that's an idea which would definitely reduce the amount of cabling, since I would just have one main 10 gauge positive and negative coming from the battery, and then from the fuse block everything would just pass down through this bottom panel here, right down there. So a lot less of a distance to actually run cable between the fuse block and the rocker panel. So I'm still kind of up in the air about that. So I gotta shower a little bit earlier, so my hair's all over the place. But still trying to figure out where I want to mount it. But I did look at that rocker panel a little bit more last night, and it definitely is not wired the way I want it to be wired. So it's going to be quite a bit of work having to rewire it all. So that'll probably take me about an hour or two. But apart from that, we're going to take the boat out today, and I'll probably get at it in about, probably after we get in, 5 or 6 hours from now. So I will get the camera back out and start recording that process once I start.